Let's meet someone who has revolutionised venture capital in Australia. I'm Kate Save. The Inspired CEO starts now. Welcome to The Inspired CEO, where each episode we explore the innovative wellness practices that are driving success and longevity in the modern business world. Steve Maarbani is a corporate lawyer and former PwC partner specialising in venture capital. As CEO of VentureCrowd, he is pioneering the digitisation of the private capital markets and using technology to make it easier for founders to raise capital and to connect with investors at scale. Steve has been pivotal in shaping Australia's crowdsource funding landscape with expertise in capital raising, fund establishment and mentoring founders. He holds a Masters of Law from the University of Sydney. Welcome, Steve. Thank you for coming in.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Kate.
Well, you've had a really interesting journey. So starting back at PwC, but even before that, what made you go into law? Tell me a little bit about growing up and your childhood.
Yeah, so my parents immigrated to Australia in the 70s. They were escaping civil war. So they moved to Australia. Dad was a mechanic. Mum was running a service station, and I was brought up in a very modest and humble family. We didn't have a lot of money. I was 12 years old when Australia's interest rates were sitting at about 17%. So I lived through their pressure of not having financial security and not really knowing how they were going to get through that kind of period. And I mean, those were really formative years. They were really helpful in terms of understanding how to, manage life on a budget, but also they were, deep inside me was this idea that the status quo is unacceptable and it should change. How do I get past this, right? And the one thing that my parents were really clear on is that there's a very simple answer to that, and that is education is the key to financial security. So I focused on that. High school, tertiary education, went and got my master's, and I was like, rightio, now what? Let's go, right? I'm fully educated, let's take on the world. But the other thing they instilled in me as part of that sort of backstory, I suppose, is this real sense of social justice and this real sense of fairness, and this idea that opportunity creates prosperity, right? And so I've always been moved by the idea that inside families, inside people, inside business, inside companies, there's this opportunity to unlock potential as long as people have opportunity. And that's kind of driven me from those early days to what I do now in venture capital, because it's a very similar kind of concept, right? Where is that opportunity? Who are those people? What are they working on? And how do we help them to untap that opportunity?
And that is very different to PwC, perhaps, where only a limited part of the population really had access to that. So establishing VentureCrowd, what did that look like, actually getting started? Because most people have the idea, but they don't go through with it.
Yeah, so it kind of all started at PwC. I remember when I started there, it was in 2007. And for those of you who are as old as me, you'll know that that's pretty much when the GFC was just about to snowball, right? I've been accused of a lot of things, but being good at timing is not one of them. So there I am. It's a dream job. I'm really excited to be there, global firm, all of this. GFC starts to snowball. I'm one of the last people to be hired, so I'm thinking I'm going to be the first person to be let go. So I'm desperately looking for an opportunity to add value, right? And at exactly the same time, the government had introduced the early stage venture capital limited partnership program. World's worst name, but actually a really important program for venture capital in Australia. And what it basically was a tax-free venture capital fund structure, which incentivized people to invest in early stage and innovative companies. And I was like, cool, we're a tax firm, this is really important, let's go, let's take this to market. So I ran around the firm looking for, but I was a junior, right? So I ran around the firm looking for support. I needed a tax partner, knocking on doors saying, look, this is really important, let's take this to market. And was basically met with blank stares, right? Because this is at a time, 2008, at a time when venture capital in Australia was this big.
Yeah.
And without any disrespect to the firms that were operating at the time, there might have been 3 firms operating at the time.
Gosh.
There really was no venture capital sector. Everybody who was innovating in this country was picking up and going overseas to look for capital. So the partners rightly were sort of saying, well, we're not really interested in venture capital. Anyway, finally I found a tax partner who was really supportive of the idea, and we scheduled these briefings in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane to take this idea to the market, right? And then I was like, great, I've got a tax partner, we've got dates, the firm is supportive, let's go. And then I realised I don't know anything about public speaking. I'm not comfortable being on stage.
Oh.
I'd never had any experience before, and believe it or not, like you might not believe this, but I rate as an introvert rather than an extrovert.
I wouldn't, but I hear this all the time, so I get it.
I am a functioning introvert, as
Yeah.
my friend Wendy would say. So the idea of being on stage at a platform with a whole bunch of people listening to what I've got to say was really scary. So like, I've got this opportunity, but I don't know what to do with it. So I needed to get comfortable with it right away. So I just did a bunch of research to find out, okay, what do I need to know about presenting in this way? And one of my friends who's a performer, who's used to being on stage, basically said to me, it's just a show. Get a script, make sure the narrative is compelling, rehearse, and then do your thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, cool, 4 steps, I can do that.
Yeah.
So we're leading up to the day. It's the very first briefing. It's a Friday in Sydney. I'm pumped, I'm ready, I'm rehearsed, I'm ready to go, right? This is my big moment. And that was the week that Lehman Brothers collapsed in the States and literally the entire financial world went into freefall. So I'm like, okay, now what, right? So, I didn't sleep that night. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to walk into a room of fund managers and try to present the case that venture capital in Australia is about to grow and that this is the structure to do it with and we can help you in a time when we are probably at the crux of one of the greatest global financial crises we've ever seen. So what the hell is going to happen?
Yeah.
But we went through it and we did it. And obviously what happened after that is nothing, right? Like nobody was setting up funds. No one was investing in startups. It was such a high risk moment. No one knew how the dust was going to settle on the GFC. So there I was sort of standing with my VC flag and the PwC brand behind me with nobody knocking at the door.
Yeah.
But what happened in that period between 2008, 2010 was some of the greatest advancements in technology that we have seen in a long time at that point. That's when WhatsApp was established, Instagram, Airbnb, Uber, all these companies
In this period of time?
Yeah, in the middle of the GFC. So while investors were sitting on their hands and going, we're not investing in anything because we don't know what's going to happen with the financial markets, the technology sector was going through the roof. So by the time the dust settled on the GFC, 2010, everybody wanted to invest in tech. Right. And there I was standing holding a flag which said, we can help you with VC. So in some ways, it's kind of just luck, right?
Yeah.
But that's sort of how it started.
Right. So in that phase, I guess, you're thinking this is not going to work, but even as you tell the story, it's all doom and gloom, but you still are optimistic about it.
Yeah.
So how did you get through those dark days to actually be there 2 years later after this is all settled?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, intuitively, I genuinely believe the founders are the future.
Yeah.
And I believe that major global problems can be solved through innovation, and the people who will be responsible for doing that hard work will be founders and entrepreneurs and innovators.
Yeah.
I don't think it sits with government, and I think, without going down that rabbit hole, the state of the global politics is such that I'm not sure we can have a lot of faith in that necessarily. But I do believe that the founders will save us, and I think they are worth investing in. So I'm not a founder. Well, I'm a founder of VentureCrowd, but I'm not necessarily a scientist or somebody who's going to make a big difference to, medical science or climate change or anything major like that. But what we can do, the contribution we can make, is to support them by helping them with funding.
Yes.
And I've always believed that the private capital markets are inefficient. They lack transparency. They're highly fragmented. They're very, very difficult to navigate, but they do not need to be like that. And the digitisation of the private capital markets, digital capital raising, if you like, does make it easier for founders to have other pathways to raise capital and to do it efficiently.
And when we look at the way the world's going, with everything being on social media now, and every platform being something that everyone in the world could really access if they want to, if the government hasn't blocked it. So having raising capital with the general public actually makes sense when people have access to information.
Right.
And we're finding that influencers probably have more push and pull than perhaps some of the government leaders around the world.
Yeah.
What impact has that had on the way that people are raising funds and crowdfunding? How has that grown?
Yeah, I mean, I think traditional private capital markets are like closed clubs, right? And because they are so traditionally operated, they're very high cost to serve. So if you've got $10,000 and you want to invest in the next cancer therapeutic, you just can't.
Yeah.
There's no real way for you to access that. But there are hundreds of thousands of people across Australia and around the world who do want to do that, who do want to participate in that, who want to invest in those kinds of innovative businesses because they believe in that growth story, but also they want to secure wealth for themselves. This is not purely altruistic, right? When these founders succeed, not only did they get an opportunity to realise their full potential, potentially solve serious problems, but they create wealth for everybody around them, themselves, their families, their teams, their shareholders, but also opportunities in the market, jobs, and so on and so on. So these things are super important to focus on. How we do it digitally is, in my mind, incredibly sensible, because I think about the legacy processes in the capital raising process, and I think which parts of that process can be digitised. One part, which is really obvious to digitise, is what you just talked about, which is distribution.
Yeah.
Right. So if I want to speak to, for example, if I want to speak to somebody about BeFit Foods, I'm looking for people who are investors in the health and wellness space. Now, if I'm a broker, I run through my list of people who are on my database, and when I finish that list, that's it. It's over. But doing it digitally allows us to very specifically and in a very targeted way, using data science, target particular people in particular demographics with particular interests very, very specifically. And so what you do is you open up the investor world much, much more broadly than any broker ever could. And you're able to target them in a way which is much more accurate than you would if you were simply making calls off a database. So digital tools in a capital raising process are not just work, but in my view, work better than traditional capital raising.
And you said earlier, there wouldn't have been anywhere for the mum and dad investor who had $10,000 and went, what can I do with this to get some better interest than what I might get from the bank? So this opens up that opportunity for the everyday person who's been working hard for decades to actually do something that gives them a little bit of financial freedom later down the track.
100%. Let me give you an example, right? So 2 years ago, we were approached by two ex-CSIRO scientists, right? They had developed a novel cancer therapeutic that could be administered into the body using nanocell technology. Now, I'm not a scientist, so that's all I can tell you about the science, right? Early studies were showing that it was working well, but they were running out of money after approaching all of the usual investors. So they came to VentureCrowd. And to be honest with you, I wasn't sure whether such a complex piece of intellectual property, cancer, would resonate effectively with a wide audience in a digital capital raising environment. But because it was cancer, because it was important, we took it on and we gave it a shot. Within 4 weeks of opening their campaign, they reached their target of $1 million. And there was so much momentum behind this company and these people, these scientists, that we said, you should keep this open. There's so much momentum, you may as well keep this open. And they did. And it went to 2 million, and then it went to 3, then it went to 4. Then when it finally hit $5 million in investment, they asked us to close the campaign so they could get on with curing cancer, right?
This is incredible.
It was so incredible. And hundreds of investors from all over the place who just went, yes, this is important to me. Either I've had some connection with cancer, or I've lost somebody, or I believe in this science. For whatever reason, we syndicate small amounts of capital. It turned into $5 million, and it allowed this company to do what they did next. And over the next 2 years, they've locked in distribution and manufacturing agreements across Southeast Asia. So now a major piece of the commercialization puzzle has been solved, because they have the drug, but you still need to manufacture and then you need to distribute. So it's a really important part of the go-to-market plan, locked and loaded, ready to go, with funding available from those partners. So that's sitting there waiting, right? And they've finished a trial recently in the US with a late-stage pancreatic cancer patient. She had been given 2 months to live. She had tried everything. And because she was literally on death's door, the FDA allowed her to use this trial drug as part of the right to try compassionate regime.
Okay.
2 years later, she's alive and well,
Wow.
no sign of a tumour. And this is a world first case of late stage pancreatic cancer having a full recovery from innovation funded by the crowd digitally. So we know that this works, right? We know that if you tell this story in a digital way, investors from across the spectrum who have an interest in the innovation itself can participate and want to participate. And our job is simply to facilitate that as easily as possible.
And I guess what these founders are doing is really changing the world, because governments would take so long to catch up there. The fact that soft drinks and lollies and sugar and processed foods is 70% of the products in the supermarket, all of the rubbish that is cancer causing, and it's proven. We were actually contacted a couple of years ago by the Cancer Council at Be Fit Food to say, would you support us in a Stop Sugar campaign? And they ran this commercial about sugar causing cancer, but there was uproar and they had to take it down, and controversy, because people should have freedom of what they can eat. And the Cancer Council weren't saying you can't eat these things. They were just making the direct link that is there, that too much sugar is definitely linked to cancer, and the fact that that was shut down, that campaign was shut down.
I think that's outrageous, because yes, people should absolutely have choice, but they should also have the information.
Yes.
And if you have the information, if the information is available to the authorities, then let people know. I mean, I think that's extraordinary.
Yeah, and so I think I'm with you. Founders can change the world. Now, going back to health, what do you do for health? How do you stay fit and healthy, and how do you get through those moments where it must be tough working with founders that have got these big ups and downs, and you're there to support them?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Three pieces of advice. Get a personal trainer.
Yes.
Meditate.
Yes.
And eat broccoli sprouts.
So good. I love that. So good.
Well, without getting into broccoli sprouts, they truly are amazing. Google it. But really what I'm saying is, and this is just my personal view, this is sort of how I got through it. When I was at PwC, the firm was really, really good to me, super supportive. They gave me a platform. I grew up really in that firm. So I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity. But it's an intense role. And it's not just that firm, it's all of the major firms. If you're in a role like that, the truth is it's seriously intense. It's 12-hour days. You don't eat well. You're back-to-back meetings. You come up for air at 3 o'clock. You're starving because you haven't had anything to eat yet. You get down to the food court. There's the dregs of whatever's left. You grab a sandwich because that's all that's left. I mean, my one memory of that decade is of just being hungry the entire time. Do you know what I mean?
You had access to a gym, you just didn't have any time to use it.
You don't have time. I didn't have time to train. I certainly didn't have time to meditate. So when I left the firm, whilst my career was in a really good spot, my body and my mind were absolutely shot.
Yes.
And the very first thing I did is I went and got a personal trainer, because I knew that I don't know enough about my body.
Yeah.
And so I wanted somebody to help me train and get stronger and get fitter. And I wanted somebody to help me with nutrition, because I knew that I had neglected that for a long time and I don't know anything about it. So somebody needed to help me with that. And then I found, it was recommended to me actually, Sam Harris's Waking Up app, which I now use for meditation and mindfulness.
Amazing.
And I use it every day. I literally did a 10-minute meditation before coming in here.
Well done.
Because it just helps me center, right?
Yes.
It's really simple. It's on an app. I can do it from anywhere. And it's really helped me to stay centered and to understand my mind a little bit more. There's a bit more work to do, but it's a start, right? And so that would be my advice. Get a personal trainer, meditate, and understand what you're eating and why.
And add broccoli sprouts. So
And
thank you very much, Steve. This is The Inspired CEO. We'll be right back.